Welcome to Cheat Sheet Tale, where secrets slip, lies unravel, and the truth always has a twist. Real stories, raw confessions, and shocking betrayals. Drop a comment if you've ever caught a red flag too late. Now let's get into today's tale. The words clung to the sterile air of Jasper Vance's glass-walled office as I stared down at the severance agreement. Don't worry, nobody's going to remember what you did here anyway. 5 years of blood, sweat, and 70, our weeks were reduced to a flick of. A stylus across a digital pad and a dismissive smirk. I kept my face composed, even as a white-hot pressure built in my chest, burning for an outlet I couldn't afford to show. "Thank you for the opportunity," I said, standing with professional grace. That felt almost grotesque in the face of such betrayal. Elara Quinn, former lead systems architect of Novasphere Technologies, walked out of that office with my spine rigid and my canvas toed embarrassingly light. Jasper didn't even glance up from his gleaming laptop, his chiseled profile bathed in the midday Los Angeles sun that streamed through windows bought with the series of millions we had once toasted together, past rows of oblivious engineers typing away some still debugging systems. I had built line by line in a stifling G-ninage years ago. I moved like a ghost. They didn't know they were losing my fingertips, brushed the edge of my old desk, where a wilting succulent, a cracked coffee mug, and a photo of my brother grinning at. His graduation made up the sum of my existence here. Clocking out early, chirped Avery, one of the newer hires, flashing a grin too green to understand the hollow echo. His words caused forcing a smile so brittle it felt like my lips might crack. I tossed the last of my things into the bag. 5 years, and it all fit into a single tote that weighed less than the invisible burden of what I had given up as I pressed the elevator button. Cashin's words replayed in my mind, growing louder with every second, not just cruel, but dangerously, laughably wrong. They had no idea the foundation of Novasphere's empire was tangled with my fingerprints. My structure, my very language embedded into every core line of the product. They now believed they could scale without me. I had designed the security architecture during those desperate nights when our only server room was an overheating closet, and Jasper couldn't even code a basic API without me stepping in. The documentation was never truly finished because there was always another fire to put out, another investor, to impress, another bug to fix at 2 in the morning when the world slept and we bled for this dream. And now they thought they could erase me with a severance check, and a smile inside the elevator. I exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of decision sharpening within me, cold and surgical. It wasn't rage that filled me. It was clarity, pure and bright, a blade forged from years of neglect and false promises Cashin had played his hand, thinking I was naive enough to walk away empty-handed, but I had inherited my father's ruthlessness and my mother's penchant for contingency planning. Every architecture draft, every version log, every keystroke that mattered had long been copied to a private drive under legal safekeeping with my attorney, Maya Cole. By the time I pulled out of the parking G-ninage, a plan was crystallizing like frost across my mind's eye. I wasn't going to chase revenge, but I wasn't going to grant mercy. Either Novasphere thought they owned my creations, my labor, my mind. But what they didn't realize was that my best work, the critical backbone of our authentication system, had been incubated before I ever signed a contract I had brought it to them as a gift. They had turned it into a weapon against me. Now it was my turn to decide who held the keys to the kingdom. On the drive home along the Pacific Coast Highway, the ocean shimmered under the afternoon sun, indifferent to my professional death. I called Dearest, my voice steadier than I expected as I told her, "It's done, they replaced me." Dearest didn't miss a beat, her voice low and measured. "And the files you sent me last month are still safe, time-stamped, and ready to be used the next morning." I woke in years, sunlight warming my skin instead of fluorescent office lights draining it over black coffee and avocado toast. I reviewed the carefully cataloged documents Damaris had printed. JIT repositories, email trails, early architectural drafts showing clear timestamps months before Novasphere even had a company name with meticulous precision. I had laid the breadcrumbs long before I ever smelled the rock growing beneath Cashin's charming facade. For the first time in a long while, I felt an odd flutter of hope unfurl in my chest, like wings itching for flight. 3 days after my dismissal, the first email arrived from a junior engineer I had once mentored, a quiet plea disguised as small talk. "Hey El Nina, weird question. Do you happen to remember why the second layer encryption module authenticates through a trifold token? System, Troy. The new guy can't make sense of it. I smiled grimly, sipping my tea. The beginning of their unraveling was sooner than even I had dared hope. My architecture wasn't just difficult to replace, it was nearly impossible without the key buried. Inside, my shorthand notes that afternoon as I lounged on the balcony of my rented apartment overlooking the cliffs, my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I debated letting it ring, but curiosity won out and I answered with a crisper. Quinn speaking on the other end. Cashin's voice, suddenly stripped of its usual arrogance, filled the line with a forced cheerfulness that made my stomach churn with satisfaction. "Nina, hey, hope you're doing well," he began, and I could almost hear him squirming behind the rehearsed politeness. "I'm fantastic, Cashin," I said, letting the words drip with a casual indifference I knew would rankle him. "What can I do for you?" A pause, a stammer, and then he stumbled into the real reason for his call. "There have been some minor hiccups with the rollout. We were hoping you might consult briefly, just to answer a few questions, help the transition stay smooth." I let the silence stretch deliciously long, watching a gull coast lazily across. The ocean breeze. "I appreciate the offer," I said at last, "but I'm incredibly busy these days. I'm sure Troy, with all his extensive experience, can handle it before he could counter." I added, "Best of luck, Cashin," and hung up without waiting for a reply, tossing my phone onto the cushioned chair beside me like it was suddenly beneath my attention. I felt a slow, genuine smile spread across my face. Small victories had a flavor sweeter than anything Novosphere had ever offered that night. I forwarded Jasper's desperate voicemail and follow-up email offering to double my consulting fee to Maya with a single line, "Let them stew." Dammer replied almost instantly, her words razor sharp. "The more they sweat, the better the leverage. Hold your ground in the distance beyond the soft crash of waves." I could almost hear the fragile empire of Novosphere beginning to creak under its own arrogant weight, and I was only just getting started a week later. Novosphere's trouble spilled into the public eye like a bloodstain. Nobody could scrub. Clean clients began posting furious complaints on LinkedIn and Twitter about the catastrophic failures of the once unshakable security systems. I had designed news articles with headlines like "Tech Darling Novosphere Faces," "Mysterious Technical Collapse," and rumors swirl after sudden executive shakeup started surfacing, feeding a frenzy that investors couldn't ignore. Every time I saw a new report, I felt a dark satisfaction curling warmly in my chest. Vindication tastes better when served with scandal. By the second week, the stock price began to slide, shedding percentages the way a sinking ship sheds rivets in their panic. Novosphere's leadership tried bandaging the wounds with desperate press releases about technical enhancements and strategic pivots, but the market wasn't buying it. Meanwhile, my inbox was quietly filling, with offers, competitor firms offering CTO positions, venture capitalists inviting me to discuss future partnerships, and even discreet inquiries from some of Novosphere's top clients. Cashin must have realized by then that the ghost he tried to erase was rapidly becoming the storm he couldn't control. One rainy Thursday morning, as I was meeting with a recruiter at an upscale cafe downtown, my phone buzzed again. Cashin Vance's incoming call. I let it ring twice, savoring the tiny crack in his composure that each unanswered call must have widened, then answered with deliberate slowness. "Nina speaking," I said smoothly, watching raindrops race each other down the window pane. Cashin's voice came through, strained, brittle around the edges. "Nina, please, we need to talk. This situation has gotten complicated. I imagine it has," I replied, swirling my spoon lazily through my cappuccino foam. He stumbled through a half apology laced with half-truth, trying to lure me into a consulting arrangement. "Under the guise of old loyalty, there's a significant bonus on the table," he added, voice lowering like he was offering me some forbidden fruit. I almost laughed out loud. He still didn't understand that loyalty wasn't bought with blood money, not anymore. "I'm afraid my schedule's packed for the next foreseeable future," I said, letting the words slice clean and cool. "Perhaps Troy can sort it out. After all, you did bring him in to replace me, didn't you?" There was a beat of silence thick with humiliation before Cashin muttered, "Nina, be reasonable. We both know you built the system. Nobody else can fix it." I smiled into my coffee cup, savoring the unspoken admission like a fine wine. After hanging up, I immediately forwarded the conversation recording to Damaris, who responded within minutes. They're cracking. "We move in 3 days. We had already prepared everything, a formal notice of retained intellectual property rights, citing the original GitHub timestamps, development logs, and written communications, proving the authentication system's pre-existing creation. Once we delivered it, Novosphere would legally be barred from using the very heart of their product without my consent. The countdown to their implosion had officially begun that night. Scrolling through industry forums, I stumbled across a thread so damning it took my breath away. Anonymous engineers inside Novosphere were leaking chaos from within. They described mass confusion, broken systems, infighting between departments, and Troy, the supposed savior, throwing tantrums behind closed doors. One comment stood out like a neon flare heard from a friend at Threshold Ventures, that Novosphere's lead investor is furious, might be blood on the boardroom floor soon. I leaned back, heart hammering with grim exultation. Jasper's world was collapsing faster than even I had predicted. 2 days later, I was woken by a sharp knock at my apartment door at Sit-them-way, and I peered through the peephole and froze. It was Marcellus Kine, the cold-eyed legal shark known to represent Threshold Ventures. After a moment's hesitation, I opened the door, meeting his steely gaze without flinching. "Miss Quinn," he said curtly, "represent parties with a vested interest in the survival of Novosphere. May I come in?" I led him into the living room, every nerve in my body buzzing with adrenaline. Kane wasted no time. It has come to our attention that significant elements of Novosphere's intellectual property were developed independently by you, prior to your employment threshold. Ventures considers this an undisclosed liability, and we intend to address it immediately. His words were clipped transactional, but there was a flicker of urgency behind his precision. For the first time since my dismissal, I realized the power dynamics had shifted entirely in my favor. "I have evidence to support my claims," I said calmly, placing a neat folder of documentation onto the coffee table. Kane didn't even blink before pulling out his phone and snapping pictures of every page, his face unreadable. "We'll be in touch," he said, rising as swiftly as he had sat down, leaving me alone in a room crackling with electric possibility. Outside, the storm that had been brewing all week finally broke open, sheets of rain hammering the city in a fury. That evening, as thunder rolled over the skyline, Dearest called with news that sent a jolt through me. "The Threshold Board has called. For an emergency meeting tomorrow morning, they've requested your presence." My pulse quickened, not with fear, but with the charged energy of a battle I had trained my whole career to win. "It's happening faster than expected." Dearest continued, her voice crisp with excitement. "You're no longer fighting for recognition, Anina. You're fighting for the future of the company." I slept poorly that night, adrenaline coiling and uncoiling beneath my skin like a live wire. Visions of Jasper's smirk, the engineers' frantic faces, the investors' calculating stares flickered behind. My closed eyelids when dawn broke pale and gray. I dressed carefully, black tailored suit hair pulled back into a sharp twist, no jewelry save a simple silver ring my father had given me when I graduated today. I wasn't walking into Novosphere as the discarded architect. I was walking in as the reckoning they had never seen coming. The glass doors of Novosphere's headquarters gleamed under the overcast sky as I strode across the marble lobby, Dearest walking confidently beside me, every head turned. As we passed, engineers, executives, even interns paused mid-con conversation to stare, whispers rippling like a shockwave in our wake. I kept my gaze forward, my expression unreadable as the familiar scent of antiseptic floors and recycled air filled my lungs. This was no longer my home. This was my battlefield inside the main conference room. The tension was thick enough to slice through every seat at the gleaming mahogany table occupied by somber-faced board members and key investors. Cashin sat at the head, visibly strained, his once carefree confidence now replaced by a thin veneer of control fraying at the edges. Marcellus Kane nodded curtly at me as we entered, indicating the seat reserved at the far end, one that ironically had once been mine during the company's early days. Dearest placed a sleek black folder on the table, its presence a silent warning to everyone present. "Thank you for joining us, Miss Quinn," said Celeste Hale, a senior partner at Threshold Ventures, her voice crisp and businesslike. "We're here to address recent discoveries regarding the proprietary technology critical to Novosphere's operations." I simply nodded, waiting, feeling the undercurrent of electricity that snapped between every exchange of glances. Around the table, Cashin opened his mouth to speak, but Celeste raised a hand to silence him with the effortless authority of someone used to cutting through pretense. "Miss Quinn," she continued, turning her full attention to me, "it has come to our attention that the authentication system at the core of Novosphere's product was primarily developed by you prior to your formal employment. Here, can you confirm this? I met her gaze steadily, my voice clear and unwavering. Yes, I can confirm I have. Documented proof repository timestamps, emails, and early prototype records at Maya's signal. I connected my laptop to the room's projection system and began to display the evidence commit histories from my private GitHub dated months before Novasphere's. Incorporation email exchanges where I explicitly outlined the migration of my independent work into the company's infrastructure early architecture diagrams, signed with my initials EAL. Every slide landed like a hammer blow in the room, the silence deepening until it felt almost suffocating. Cassie invisibly squirmed as I presented a particularly damning email thread where he had encouraged me to integrate my pre-existing framework into Novasphere's product roadmap without formal intellectual property agreements beyond standard employment terms. This doesn't prove anything. He finally burst out, his voice too loud, too desperate. She was paid for her time, everything she did belongs to the company. Celeste turned to him with a sharp, icy smile that didn't touch her eyes. On the contrary, Mr. Vance, she said coolly, Miss Quinn's documentation clearly demonstrates that the critical components predated her employment contract, meaning standard work for hire provisions do not apply. You failed to secure a formal IP transfer. The room buzzed with the barely contained energy of shifting loyalties, board members leaning in, whispering behind hands, the fabric of Jaspers, authority unraveling thread by thread. I watched him pale, his fingers curling into fists on the polished table surface. Victor Lang. Another investor adjusted his glasses and spoke up for the first time. Logan was the existence of this prior work, disclosed to the board during the series of funding round. Cashin's mouth opened and closed, soundlessly, a fish gasping on dry land. No, I answered for him, my voice cutting across the room like a blade. It wasn't disclosed because Jasper downplayed it, assuring investors the entire system was developed under his leadership. A collective intake of breath rippled across the conference room. The enormity of the deception landing with brutal clarity. Damaris took the floor. Then her tone measured, but lethal as per the notice of retained intellectual property rights sent last week. Novasphere is now in breach. If they continue using the authentication system without a formal licensing agreement, she let the implication hang in the air. Novasphere's product would effectively be dead in the water without my consent. Cashin blanched, beads of sweat forming at his hairline, but it was Celeste who dealt the final blow. Given the gravity of these revelations, she said firmly, the board has voted to remove Cassie and Vance from his position as CEO effective immediately. Cashin shot up from his chair, sending it skidding backwards, his face twisted in rage. You can't do this. I built this company from nothing, he shouted, veins bulging at his temples. You built it on stolen foundations, Celeste countered coolly, and now it's crumbling because of your arrogance. Security guards appeared at the door, silent but unmistakable in their intent, and Cash's eyes darted from face to face before he realized there was no help coming. He grabbed his leather briefcase, muttering curses under his breath, and stalked out of the room without looking back the moment the doors clicked shut behind him. The atmosphere in the room shifted lighter, almost relieved, like a collective breath had finally been released. I sat motionless, absorbing the surreal magnitude of the moment. Victor Lang cleared his throat and addressed me directly. Miss Quinn, the board recognizes your indispensable role in the creation of Novasphere's core technologies. We'd like to formally offer you the position of Chief Technology Officer. With full equity compensation and public acknowledgement of your contributions for a heartbeat. The room seemed to hold still, everyone waiting for my answer. I glanced at Maya, who gave a barely perceptible nod, her eyes gleaming with approval. Accept? I said simply, my voice steady, and a ripple of relief passed through the investors. Additionally, Celeste added, we propose entering into a licensing agreement with you for the continued use of the authentication system with royalties on all future revenues generated from it. A slow smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. This wasn't just victory, it was justice made tangible, a legacy reclaimed from the ashes of betrayal. As the meeting adjourned, Celeste approached me privately, her expression unusually warm. You saved this company today, she said quietly. And you reminded everyone in this room why underestimating the right woman can be the most catastrophic mistake they'll ever make. I thanked her, feeling the weight of the past few months of the years spent being overlooked, dismissed, sacrificed, finally lift from my shoulders like a shroud slipping to the floor. The war was over, but the rebuilding was just beginning outside. The storm had passed, leaving behind a city washed clean and gleaming under fragile shafts of sunlight, breaking through the clouds. I stood for a long moment on the steps of Novasphere's headquarters, letting the cool breeze brush against my face, savoring the simple, undeniable truth. I had walked through fire, and I had come out forged, not burned 3 months later. Novasphere didn't just survive the scandal. It transformed under my leadership as CTO. We rebuilt the fractured architecture, corrected the technical debt Jasper had recklessly ignored, and reinstated a culture of transparency and merit. Engineers who had once been sidelined under his regime now flourished, contributing openly without fear of credit theft. Slowly, our reputation stabilized, and with it, client trust began to return like cautious waves kissing a once-abandoned shore. The official announcement recognizing my contributions was more satisfying than I had expected, not because of the accolades, but because the truth was finally carved into stone where no one could erase it again. Press releases praised my visionary design, interviews highlighted the indispensable innovation I had brought to Novasphere, and speaking invitations poured in from tech conferences I had once only dreamed of attending. Even Threshold Ventures hosted a private gala in my honor, introducing me as the true architect of Novasphere success, a title that felt heavier and yet sweeter than any trophy. It wasn't revenge I savored, it was restoration during this time. Rumors about Cashin's downfall spread like wildfire across the tech community. Each story more pitiful than the last word was. He tried launching a new startup called Skybound Systems, but investors shunned him as if he carried a contagion without Novasphere. Success pinned to his chest like a medal. He was just another pretty face with empty promises, and in Silicon Valley that meant death by irrelevance. One evening, scrolling absent-mindedly through LinkedIn, I stumbled across his updated profile, independent, consultant seeking new opportunities, a tragic fall from the self-made titan he once pretended to be. It would have been easy to feel triumphant seeing him reduced to footnotes inside glances, but all I felt was a distant, detached sympathy he had built his kingdom on stolen foundations and thought it would stand forever. He had never understood that true power lies in what you create, not what you claim. I closed the browser window without a second thought, redirecting my focus to a project. Proposal sitting on my desk, a blueprint for Novasphere's next innovation, this time crafted not by desperation but by ambition. For the first time in years, the future felt expansive, limitless, like a horizon finally free of storm clouds. One quiet Friday afternoon, as I was finalizing deployment plans for our upcoming product release, an unexpected email slid into my inbox, the sender Cassie Vance. For a long moment, I just stared at it, my heart visibly steady, no anger or dread, just mild curiosity. The subject line was simply apology against my better judgment. I clicked it open. The message was short, surprisingly earnest in tone. Nina, I owe you an apology. I see now what I was too arrogant to acknowledge. Then you were the backbone of Novasphere, and I failed you as a leader and a partner. I hope someday you'll accept that I'm truly sorry, though I know I don't deserve it. Wishing you success, Jasper. I sat back in my chair, absorbing the words without the emotional detonation. I might once have expected it wasn't forgiveness he sought. It was absolution, and that was something only he could grant himself. I typed a response slowly, carefully weighing every syllable. In the end, I chose simple clarity over bitterness. Cash in. I wrote, thank you for your apology. I accept it. Not because it erases the past, but because I refuse to let it define me. I sincerely wish you growth in whatever path you choose next. I hit send and leaned back, staring out the massive window overlooking the humming city below. Closure didn't come with fireworks or grand gestures. It came quietly, like the closing of a door you no longer needed to walk through. I wasn't the person who had walked into Novasphere 5 years ago, desperate for validation. I was something sharper now, something unbreakable. And I had built that. Not despite the betrayal, but because of it. That evening, we hosted a small team celebration at a rooftop bar downtown, the skyline blazing gold and violet against the setting sun. Laughter bubbled around me as my team toasted new milestones, future ambitions, and the stubborn resilience that had gotten us all here. As the night deepened, I stepped aside onto the balcony, letting the cool breeze play with my hair, breathing in the electric scent of possibility. Celeste Hale found me there, cradling a glass of champagne, and looking every inch the power broker. She was, she said thoughtfully, leaning on the railing beside me. Novosphere isn't just surviving because of your technical brilliance, it's surviving because you taught everyone what leadership actually looks like. I smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile, and clinked my glass lightly against hers. Leadership isn't about taking the spotlight, I said quietly. It's about making sure the foundation holds when the storms come. Celeste nodded, her expression approving. As fireworks suddenly bloomed across the harbor below, an impromptu celebration, or maybe just the universe agreeing with us, later that night, alone in my apartment, I sat down at my desk and opened a fresh notebook, the crisp blank pages glowing. Under the soft lamplight at the top of the first page, I wrote one word in bold, unshakable ink: began. It wasn't the beginning of revenge. It wasn't even the beginning of vindication. It was the beginning of something far rarer, far more precious. It was the beginning of a future built entirely on my terms. Looking back, I realize now that betrayal wasn't the end of my story. It was the catalyst for my rebirth. For so long, I thought my worth depended on being seen, acknowledged, validated by people like cash-in, but true power isn't given to you by others. It's something you claim for yourself the moment you stop asking for permission. Sometimes the greatest victories are born, not from fighting to stay somewhere you're no longer valued, but from walking away with your dignity intact and your future wide open. Pain taught me clarity, loss taught me strength, betrayal taught me to build foundations so solid that no one could ever uproot me again if someone tries to erase your contributions. Remember, the truth has a way of resurfacing brighter and stronger than ever, and when it does, it will be undeniable. You are not invisible. You are not replaceable. You are a force of your own making. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or betrayed, know that your worth isn't diminished by the blindness of others. It's waiting to be reclaimed by you. If you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story with someone who needs a reminder of their power. Your voice matters, your contributions matter, and your future is brighter than anyone else's. Doubts could ever dim. Stay strong, stay true, and keep building the life they said you couldn't.